I vanished 4 years ago, pregnant, terrified, and running from the most dangerous man I had ever loved. I changed my name. I moved to a small town in Oregon. I became a librarian. I told my twins their father was dead. Then one afternoon, while I was shelving picture books, I heard expensive shoes behind me. And a voice that stopped my heart said, "They are beautiful children, Emma. They have my mother's chin." Ethan Blackwood had found us. He had photos. He had surveillance. He knew every detail of the life I had built to hide from him. But here is the part that destroyed me. He wasn't the only one looking. A rival crime family had been hunting my children too. And when they kidnapped my 4-year-old son, the only person on earth who could bring him back alive was the very man I had spent 4 years running from. This is the story of a woman who hid her children from a mob boss and then had to beg him to save them. This story will remind you that you can't protect the people you love by running forever, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is also the only one willing to destroy the world to keep your family safe. The fluorescent lights of the Willowbrook Public Library hummed a relentless, droning tune, bleaching the world in a beige institutional glow that made even the brightest book covers seem weary. For the 100th time today, I pushed my reading glasses up my nose, leaning over a mountain of returned books that seemed to grow on its own. A familiar, deep ache pulsed in my lower back, a constant reminder of endless hours spent bending, shelving, and hauling heavy stories. My sensible shoes were no match for the unforgiving linoleum floors. It had been 4 years. 4 years since I had vanished from New York with just one hastily packed bag and the chilling knowledge that I carried the child of a man whose true self I had discovered far too late. It had been 4 years of meticulously building a quiet existence in this sleepy Oregon town. Here, the biggest news was the yearly Harvest Festival, and no one pried too deeply into the past of a single mother who arrived with perfect references and a desperate hunger for anonymity. The profound weight of exhaustion settled onto my shoulders as I steered the cart toward the children's section. My fingers instinctively found the small cross pendant tucked beneath my cardigan, a final gift from my mother. It was my anchor in moments of stress, its cool, smooth surface, a defense against the anxiety that could creep up my spine like frozen water. The air smelled of old paper and binding glue, a scent mingling with the faint vanilla from the candle Mrs. Henderson, our head librarian, always kept burning at the front desk. It was her small battle against the mustiness baked into the library's old walls. "Emma," Sarah's voice called from the reference desk. It carried the soft, breathless quality that always colored her attempts to talk to me. She was one of the few locals who had genuinely tried to befriend me, offering invitations to book clubs and coffee that I always politely deflected, using vague excuses about my schedule or trouble finding a sitter. "The computer system is acting up again. Can you please take a look when you get a second?" I gave a small nod, maneuvering the cart between the vibrant displays of picture books and early readers. The children's section was my sanctuary within these walls, with its low shelves creating comfortable reading nooks and bright posters that urged young imaginations to discover new worlds. It was the reason I had chosen this life, this profession. Here, surrounded by tales of grand adventure and happy conclusions, I could almost convince myself the darkness I escaped was gone for good. A gentle chime from the front door signaled a new arrival, followed by the deliberate, expensive click of fine shoes on linoleum. I glanced up for a moment, seeing a tall man in a dark coat speaking with Mrs. Henderson, before turning my focus back to the books that needed to be shelved. The tourist season was winding down, but we still got the occasional visitor passing through, often academics researching the town's history or hikers exploring the trails nearby. My phone vibrated softly inside my cardigan pocket. I pulled it out and saw a message from Grace, my babysitter. She was one of the only teenagers in this town I trusted with the secret I held most dear. She wrote, "The kids are great. Eli wants to know if he can show Ella his new magic trick before you come home. Also, There's a man here asking about after-school programs. A cold dread washed over me, and my fingers clenched the phone tightly. My children almost never had visitors, and certainly not strange men asking about local programs. I quickly began to type a reply. What kind of man? Did he give you a name? But before I could hit send, the sound of those expensive shoes had drawn nearer. They were accompanied by a voice. A voice that stopped my heart and turned my blood to ice. Excuse me, the voice said, its tone deep and perfectly controlled, carrying that subtle authority I had once found so compelling. I am looking for some information on your reading programs for children. I froze completely. My hand gripped the spine of a Dr. Seuss book so hard my knuckles turned white. I knew that voice, a rich baritone laced with the faintest hint of East Coast breeding. It was the careful way of speaking that comes from elite private schools and high-stakes boardroom meetings. It was the voice that had once whispered my name in luxurious hotel rooms, promising me the entire world while concealing the monster he truly was. Fighting every single instinct that screamed for me to run, I slowly turned. Standing just 3 feet from me, dressed flawlessly in a charcoal wool coat that likely cost more than I made in a month, was Ethan Blackwood. 4 years had not lessened his powerful presence in the slightest. If anything, he seemed even more formidable now. His dark hair was now elegantly touched with silver at the temples, and his stormy gray eyes held that same dangerous intelligence that had once made me feel like the only woman on earth. He was exactly as I remembered him, and yet nothing at all like the gentle accountant he pretended to be during our short time together. This was the real Ethan Blackwood. He was the man whose name was spoken in certain circles with a mixture of profound respect and genuine fear. He was the man who ran an empire constructed from shadows and violence, a man who could erase problems with a single phone call or a quiet nod to one of his men. "Hello, Emma," he said, his voice a soft murmur. His eyes scanned my simple cardigan, my plain shoes, and the entire fragile disguise of my ordinary suburban life. "You are looking well." My throat was as dry as sandpaper. When my voice finally came, it was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" A small smile touched his lips, but never reached his eyes. "I believe you already know why I have come." His gaze then shifted deliberately to the family photos displayed on my desk, clearly visible from our position. His eyes lingered on the pictures of two dark-haired children who shared their father's unmistakable gray eyes. "They are beautiful children, Emma. They have my mother's chin." The picture book slipped from my numb fingers, landing with a soft thud on the carpet. All around us, the library hummed with its quiet afternoon routine. Mrs. Henderson was shuffling papers at the main desk, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire carefully built world was collapsing under the weight of 4 long years of secrets that had finally hunted me down. "How did you find us?" I was able to ask, even though a part of me already knew the truth. Ethan Blackwood possessed resources most people could not even begin to fathom. He had connections that spread across the nation like a spider's invisible web, ready to trap anyone foolish enough to think they could actually disappear from his world. "Does it matter how?" he answered, bending down to pick up the book with a fluid, effortless grace. As he stood up, he moved a step closer, so close I could smell his cologne. It was the same expensive fragrance that used to linger on my skin after our nights together. That was before I knew what he was, before I had any understanding of the kind of man who could touch me with such tenderness, yet wield such terrifying power. "I would like to meet them properly," he said, his voice staying at a conversational level, despite the cold threat that saturated every single word. "My son and my daughter. Our children, Emma." My hand moved on its own to my pendant, my fingers clutching it as if it were a lifeline. "They do not know about you. They believe their father passed away before they were born." Something flickered deep in his eyes. It might have been pain, or perhaps it was a carefully controlled rage. "That is unfortunate. Children ought to know their heritage, would you not agree?" They should know what they are destined to inherit. The immense weight of his words fell upon me like a burial shroud. Heritage. He did not mean family history. He meant a dark legacy, a bloodline, a succession. He was not here because of fatherly love or simple curiosity. He was here because Ella and Eli were his heirs. They were the continuation of the grim kingdom he had constructed in the shadows of his legitimate businesses. The very thought of my innocent, happy children being pulled into that life made my stomach twist with sickness. "Emma," Sarah's voice called out again from the reference desk. "Is everything all right over there?" I managed to force a smile, though it felt as if the muscles in my face might shatter from the strain. "Everything is fine. I am just assisting a patron with some information about our programs." Ethan's smile broadened, showing approval for my discretion. "Yes, I am extremely interested in the programs you have here. Perhaps we could speak about them somewhere a little more private. I have some very specific questions regarding educational opportunities for exceptionally gifted children." The words themselves were innocent enough for anyone who might be listening, but the message underneath was perfectly clear. This discussion was nowhere near finished, and he had no intention of leaving this town without securing what he came for. My children, his heirs, the future he had never known he had lost until now. I glanced over at the small conference room we used for our book club meetings. I was weighing my very limited options. I could refuse him, cause a scene, and call for help. But Ethan Blackwood was not the type of man to be handled by small-town police, and creating a disturbance would only shine a spotlight directly on Ella and Eli. Whatever dangerous game we were about to begin, it had to be played far away from innocent eyes. "The conference room is available," I said at last, my voice coming out much steadier than I felt inside. "We can discuss whatever programs might be of interest to you." He gave a nod that was almost approving, as if I had just successfully passed some kind of test. As I began to lead him toward the small room with its oval table and motivational model, while looking at the announcements, I saw myself in the window's reflection. The woman who looked back at me was only 32, but she appeared much older, with deep lines of worry around her eyes. She carried herself with the cautious stillness of a person who had learned to expect danger from anywhere, at any time. 4 years of peace, 4 years spent creating a beautiful, normal life for my kids, was about to be destroyed. And even with fear pumping through my blood, a dark corner of my heart knew the truth I fought so hard to ignore. Seeing Ethan again was a stark reminder of why I fell for him, and why that very fact made him more dangerous now than he had ever been before. The conference room seemed to shrink the moment Ethan entered, his sheer presence and powerful aura making the bright reading posters on the walls look almost silly. My hands were shaking just a little as I shut the door behind us. The soft click of the lock echoed in the tense quiet, sounding like a gavel deciding my future. Sunlight poured through the one window, stretching long shadows over the faded carpet. I found myself instinctively measuring the distance to the door, guessing how long it would take to get there, and realizing how pointless it would be to even try. "Please have a seat," Ethan said, but his tone made it a command, not a suggestion. He pulled a chair out for me with a gentlemanly gesture that felt like pure mockery under the circumstances. He radiated a controlled and absolute power in every small movement, right down to the way he fixed his cufflinks. Every action, from the way he placed his hands on the table to his posture, was deliberate. There were no fidgets, no wasted motions at all. This was a man who was used to being obeyed, whose desires were met before he even had to speak them. I stayed on my feet, needing the tiny bit of advantage my height could offer, even though we both understood it was just for my own state of mind. "How long have you had people watching us?" A small, almost affectionate smile touched his lips, as if he found my resistance charming. "Does that really matter? What matters is my presence here, now. I have some time to make up for with my children." He took out his phone and swiped through a gallery of photos. "They are 4 years old, I understand. Twins, of course. Eli looks more like my side of the family, but Ella has my mother's eyes." The easy way he discussed these private facts about my children made my entire body feel cold. You have had us under surveillance. Naturally. He put his phone down on the table. The screen showed a picture of Ella and Eli at the park near our little house. They were happy, running after each other by the swings while I read on a bench not far away. The image was incredibly sharp, obviously taken by a professional with a telephoto lens from a hidden location. Did you honestly believe you could stay hidden from me forever, Emma? Did you think I would never find out that I had children? My knees felt like they were about to buckle, so I finally dropped into the chair he had pulled out for me. My mind was spinning, trying to process what this all meant. How many pictures did he have of them? How long had strangers been observing my children, chronicling their lives, and sending reports to this man who could tear my world apart with a single command? They are safe, he said, seeming to notice my panic with something that could have been mistaken for actual concern. My men have very clear orders about their well-being. No harm will come to them as long as they are under my care. Your care? The words escaped my lips with more venom than I had intended. They do not need protection from anybody but you. Ethan's face tightened so slightly it was almost invisible, but a storm brewed behind his gray eyes. You are incredibly naive if you think that is true, Emma. The second those children took their first breath, they became targets. My enemies are not concerned with differentiating between my legitimate heirs and those they do not know about. The gravity of his statement fell on me like a heavy, suffocating weight. For 4 entire years, I was certain I had given Ella and Eli a normal existence, a life free from the brutality and constant threat that defined their father's world. But Ethan was telling me that their very existence had made them targets from the day they were born. There was a situation 3 months ago, he went on, his voice shifting to a cold, professional tone that made his story even more horrifying. Vincent Caruso's operation tried to find information on my private affairs. They got dangerously close to finding out where you live. My blood ran cold in my veins. Vincent Caruso was a name that even ordinary people recognized, a name spoken in hushed tones during news stories about mob investigations and unsolved homicides. The thought that he had been actively looking for my family made me physically ill. How close? I whispered. Close enough that I was forced to divert their focus to something else. The way he paused before saying, divert, hinted at the violent things that action must have involved. They are no longer a threat, but others exist. There will always be others, as long as my children remain unprotected. I gripped the table so hard my knuckles turned completely white. So, that is your plan. You will use threats that you disguise as acts of protection. You will use my fear to push your way into their lives. Ethan leaned his chair back, observing me with that same sharp focus I recalled from our short time together 4 years earlier. Back then, when he looked at me that way across dimly lit hotel rooms, it made me feel like the most important person in the world. Now, it just felt like I was being sized up by a predator. Tell me about them, he said, suddenly changing the topic. What are their personalities like? What things do they love to do? The inquiry surprised me, and for just a second, I thought I saw a flicker of real vulnerability in his gaze. It was not the face of a calculating mob boss, but maybe a glimpse of a father who truly wanted to understand his own kids. Eli is obsessed with magic tricks, I heard myself say before I could stop the words. He spends hours practicing with a little toy wand he received at a birthday party. And Ella, she is always reading, already far beyond her grade level. She wants to become a veterinarian because she insists that animals need someone to speak up for them. A softness entered Ethan's expression as I described them. It was a warmth I never anticipated seeing. Intelligent children, excellent. Intelligence is vital in our family. The way he said "our" did not escape me. What about their health? Are there any medical problems I need to know about? They are both in perfect health, I replied defensively, and then instantly wished I could take it back. Every detail I shared was just another string in the trap he was carefully building around our lives. Wonderful. I have already made an appointment for Dr. Harrison to see them next week. He is the pediatric specialist who cares for all the children within my organization's families. My heart hammered in my chest. You have arranged what? Regular wellness visits for children are crucial, Emma. You must agree. His tone was perfectly pleasant, but the command underneath was impossible to miss. Dr. Harrison is both discreet and meticulous. He will also handle any paperwork required for the transition. What transition? But the question was pointless. A cold dread told me I already knew the answer. Ethan's phone vibrated, and he looked at it before rising from his chair with a smooth, effortless motion. I am afraid this initial meeting must be cut short. I have other matters to attend to this afternoon. He adjusted the lapels of his coat, each movement deliberate and sure. But do not be concerned, Emma. We will have more than enough time to go over the children's future together. I am not going anywhere with you, I said, getting to my feet as well, my voice sounding much steadier than I felt. And neither are Ella and Eli. His smile was tolerant, almost condescending. I have not asked you to go anywhere, not yet. He walked to the door but stopped with his hand on the knob. Oh, and Emma, I thought you should be aware that I have purchased the house directly next to yours. The elderly couple who used to live there were very agreeable about moving once I made it clear how much I prioritize a quiet neighborhood. The world started to tilt around me. Mrs. Patterson and her husband had been our neighbors since the day I moved here. They were quiet, kind retirees who sometimes watched the kids for me when Grace was busy. They had never said a word about moving, and definitely not about selling their home to anyone. That cannot be true, they would have told me. People rarely broadcast their private financial dealings, Ethan cut in without missing a beat, particularly when those dealings involve a very generous payment for their silence. He swung the door open and then turned back for one last look. I will be staying in town for the foreseeable future, Emma. I believe it is high time I became acquainted with my children. Would you not agree? And with that final word, he was gone. The only things left behind were the faint smell of his expensive cologne and the crushing realization that the life I had so carefully built was already falling apart. Looking through the window, I saw him get into a polished black car where a driver was waiting with the car already running. The entire scene was professional and menacing, completely alien to our small town, where the most valuable car was the mayor's 5-year-old sedan. My phone buzzed. It was another message from Grace. The man left, but he wanted me to tell you that he is looking forward to meeting you. He was very charming. The kids are asking me if he was here about a play date. A play date. If only things were ever that easy. If only Ethan Blackwood was nothing more than another dad trying to schedule a social life for his kids, instead of a dangerous criminal boss taking back the heirs he never knew he had. I fell back into the chair, my legs giving out completely as the terrible reality of my situation finally hit me. He was no longer just watching from a distance. He had moved into our lives, scheduled medical care for children he had no legal claim to, and had shown me with brutal clarity just how utterly powerless I was to do anything about it. 4 years of security, of crafting a normal existence for Ella and Eli, was nothing but a fantasy. We had never really been free from Ethan Blackwood's influence. We had just been living in a fragile bubble, waiting for him to decide it was time to burst it. And now he had. The most terrifying thing was a traitorous whisper in my own mind. It suggested that maybe, just maybe, he was right about needing protection. Perhaps hiding from the world had not kept my children safe at all. It had only left them vulnerable in ways I could never have foreseen. The drive home became a thick fog of escalating panic. My hands clenched the steering wheel of my old Honda so hard that my knuckles shone bone white. Every single turn seemed to stretch into a mile, and every red light felt like an eternity where my imagination created worse and worse scenarios. What was I going to find when I finally got to our little house on Maple Street? Would Ethan be sitting there, making himself at home in my living room as my children proudly showed him their drawings? Would Grace even understand the kind of danger she had so innocently invited into our home? The familiar shape of our modest two-story house was supposed to be a comfort, but now it only filled me with a deep sense of dread. Everything looked exactly the same as when I had left that morning. Grace's worn-out Volkswagen was in the driveway. Eli's bicycle lay forgotten on the lawn. Ella's chalk art still covered the sidewalk in bright rainbow colors. It was all so normal, so peaceful, so innocent. It was everything that Ethan's world was not. I remained in the car for a long moment, trying to find my courage. My thoughts pulled me back to those 3 weeks in New York that had altered the course of my life. 4 years had not been enough to fade the memories or make them any less sharp or painful. I was 28 years old, a freelance accountant for a small company that sometimes handled corporate clients. The job had seemed perfectly ordinary. Audit the financial records for Blackwood Industries, a thriving import and export business located in Manhattan's financial district. Ethan had been utterly charming from our very first meeting, always apologizing for the late hours the work demanded. He sent expensive lunches to my temporary office and showed a real fascination with my insights into his company's finances. He seemed to be everything I thought I ever wanted in a partner. He was sophisticated, successful, and attentive in a way that made me feel truly special instead of just ordinary. When he invited me to dinner near the end of my second week, I agreed without a second thought. That dinner led to drinks at his exclusive club, and then to his penthouse apartment with its sweeping views of Central Park. I told myself I was living in a modern fairy tale. We had 3 intense weeks that felt like 3 whole months. We ate at expensive restaurants where the staff knew him by his first name, watched Broadway shows from private boxes, and spent weekends at his estate in the Hamptons, where we made love between Egyptian cotton sheets as the ocean whispered just beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. He had a way of making me feel like I was the only woman on the planet, as if he had spent his entire life just waiting to find me. The night it all shattered, I had decided to surprise him at his office. I brought takeout from his favorite Italian place, thinking we could work late together and maybe find a few quiet moments between reviewing spreadsheets. His assistant was already gone for the day, and the building was unnervingly silent as I walked toward his corner office and its panoramic view of the city. The conversation I heard through his slightly open door made my blood run cold. It was Ethan's voice, as calm and controlled as ever, talking about territory conflicts and collecting payments. He casually mentioned a man named Rodriguez, who had been taken care of for not meeting his commitments. He was methodically planning what was clearly an act of violence, using the same detached tone he used to discuss quarterly earnings reports. I stood frozen in that hallway, the takeout food growing cold in my hands, as the man I thought I loved revealed a side of himself I never knew existed. When his meeting was over, he found me standing there, pale and trembling. He knew instantly that I had heard far too much. "Emma," he had said. His voice was gentle and full of concern, the same voice he used to comfort me when I was stressed about work or family. "Come inside," he said. "Let me explain everything to you." But no explanation could ever erase the words I had heard. No excuse could make any of it acceptable. I dropped the bags of food and simply ran. I took nothing from his apartment except for my purse and the horrifying knowledge that I had been sleeping next to a man whose business dealt in broken bones and making problems disappear. The pregnancy test showed positive 2 weeks later, long after I had fled New York and was hiding with an old college friend in Oregon. By that point, I had already decided that Ethan Blackwood would never find out about the children I was carrying. Whatever love I once felt for him had soured into a bitter taste of fear and betrayal. The sound of my front door opening snapped me back into the present moment. Grace stepped outside, her teenage face glowing with an excitement that made my stomach twist into a knot of pure dread. "Mrs. Collins, you will not believe what happened today. This incredibly distinguished gentleman stopped by to ask about after-school programs. When I told him about Ella and Eli, he seemed so genuinely interested in meeting them. He mentioned that he might have some special educational opportunities for gifted children." I managed a weak smile as I got out of the car, my legs feeling shaky from the afternoon's terrifying revelations. "What did he say exactly, Grace?" "Oh, just some questions about what they like to do and what they are good at." He was really impressed when I mentioned Eli's magic shows and told him about Ella's advanced reading level. She picked up her backpack, completely unaware of the horror that was building inside of me. He left his card and said he would love to set up a formal meeting with you to go over the possibilities. Is that not exciting? I accepted the business card she offered me, my fingers trembling slightly. It was printed on heavy paper with expensive embossed letters that spelled out E. Blackwood, Educational Consultant. There was a phone number, but no business address. It looked clean, professional, and was a complete and utter lie. "Where are the children right now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "They are inside doing their homework. Ella is practicing her spelling words, and Eli is working on that difficult math sheet." Grace swung her bag over her shoulder and started walking toward her car. "Oh, and Mrs. Collins, he was such a nice man, very well-mannered, and great with the kids. Eli even showed him that card trick, the one with the vanishing coin, and the man acted like it was the most incredible thing he had ever witnessed." My heart squeezed painfully at the thought of my son, my innocent and trusting little boy, performing for the man whose blood flowed in his veins. The man who could shatter our entire world with a single word. After Grace drove away, I stood on my front porch, my eyes fixed on the house next door. The Pattersons' little ranch home looked the same as always, but now I saw things I had missed before. The for sale sign that had been on the lawn was gone. When did that disappear? The windows, which were usually open during the day, were now shut and covered by blinds. Even the flower garden that Mrs. Patterson had always tended with such love looked neglected, even though the soil was damp from being recently watered. My phone vibrated with a text message from a number I did not recognize. "The children are absolutely delightful, Emma. We need to discuss their future very soon. Are you available for dinner tomorrow night? I have made reservations at Romano's for 7 p.m. Please come alone." Romano's was the most expensive restaurant in our town, the type of place for anniversary celebrations and high-stakes business deals over white tablecloths and wine that cost more than my entire weekly budget for groceries, the kind of place Ethan Blackwood would fit into seamlessly while I would feel utterly exposed and out of place. I typed my reply. "I cannot leave the children." His response was instant. "That has been arranged. Mrs. Chen from the library will babysit. She has been carefully vetted and comes with excellent recommendations." The casual, chilling efficiency with which he had already invaded my life and made arrangements without my consent left me gasping with a combination of fury and complete helplessness. Mrs. Chen was, indeed, very trustworthy. She had helped with the children at library events before. But the fact that Ethan had already found her, already set up my schedule, proved how deeply he had been digging into our lives. Another text appeared. "Emma, I am not the enemy here. I am their father, and I only want what is best for them. Just give me one chance to prove it to you." I stared down at his words, my thumb hovering over the screen. A part of me wanted to say no, to grab the children and run as far away as my small savings account would allow. But another part of me, the part that remembered the way his expression had softened when I first told him about Ella and Eli, wondered if maybe, just maybe, we could find some kind of common ground. The front door flew open and Eli ran out, his dark hair a mess and his gray eyes shining with excitement. "Mama," Grace said, "a man who knows about magic came to visit today. Did you meet him? Is he really going to teach me some new tricks?" Behind him, Ella stood in the doorway. She was always more cautious, her identical gray eyes filled with thought. "Grace told us he asked a lot of questions about us." "Why would a stranger want to know all those things, Mama?" As I looked at them, my beautiful, innocent children with no idea that their lives were about to be turned upside down, I made my choice. If Ethan Blackwood wanted a discussion about their future, then we would have that discussion. But it was going to be on my terms, with my rules. and with the absolute certainty that I would fight him with every ounce of my being to protect the life we had built. I typed out my final response. Fine, tomorrow at 7, but we need to set some ground rules first. His reply came immediately. I look forward to it. And Emma, thank you for giving me this chance. As I guided the children into the house for our evening ritual of dinner, schoolwork, and bedtime, a comforting sequence that had been our rock for 4 years, I felt the walls of a cage I had built myself closing in. There was a profound injustice in it all, leaving me feeling utterly powerless. But I understood a fundamental truth. Real power offered protection. I had to believe that if I was extremely cautious and incredibly fortunate, I could find a compromise that would guarantee my children's safety while also calming whatever fatherly impulse had brought Ethan Blackwood to our home. The only other option was a life on the run, constantly checking over our shoulders, never knowing when he would reappear. That was no way to raise a family. By confronting this danger directly, I hoped to manage its impact on their lives. Stick with me, because what happened tomorrow would decide if I was being a fool or a survivor. The woman who stared back from my bedroom mirror was someone I barely recognized. I had selected my clothing with great care. It was a navy blue dress that I had worn to only 2 functions over the last 4 years. Both were fundraisers for the library, where a professional appearance was far more important than being fashionable. The material was of good quality, a sensible off-the-rack purchase that valued longevity over fleeting trends. I wore it with my only respectable pair of heels and the simple pearl earrings my mother gave me when I graduated from college. This was the most formidable armor I could find for a conflict I did not know how to win. Mrs. Chen showed up on the dot at 6:30. The way she handled the children with such gentle skill was both a relief and a source of deep unease. She arrived with a tote bag full of games and seemed to know precisely which cartoons Ella and Eli loved most. She even knew the bedtime stories they would ask for. The sheer depth of Ethan's investigation into our routines continued to both amaze and frighten me. "You look so pretty, Mama," Ella had whispered while I gave her a final hug. Her little hands stroked the fabric of my skirt with a sort of motherly care that made my chest tighten with pain. "Are you going to a party?" "I was just meeting an old friend for dinner," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. I despised the dishonesty, but I could not place a burden on them that was too heavy for their small shoulders. Romanos was located on the first floor of the town's single historic building, a beautifully renovated Victorian mansion. It had been meticulously restored to highlight its original crown molding and gleaming hardwood floors, all while serving the needs of a modern restaurant. I had only walked by it a few times in the evening, but I always saw the same picture: soft, intimate lighting and couples sipping wine at tables covered in immaculate white tablecloths. This restaurant existed in a financial world completely separate from my own, a place where the cost of a main course was more than my entire grocery budget for a week. The host greeted me by name the moment I entered, and his practiced smile seemed to grow genuine as he guided me away from the busy main dining area and toward a secluded booth at the back. The table was prepared for 2 people, with crystal glasses that scattered the candlelight into tiny rainbows, silverware that had the soft glow of age and quality, and china so fine it appeared almost transparent. A bouquet of fresh orchids sat in the center, their vibrant, exotic presence making the roses I sometimes bought for our kitchen table seem plain and simple in my memory. Ethan stood up as I drew near, and for a second, I was once again amazed by how naturally he fit into this kind of opulent environment. He wore a charcoal suit that was clearly custom-made, likely costing more than my entire monthly paycheck. Yet he wore it with the casual confidence of a man who had never experienced anything less. His dark hair was styled without a single flaw, and his shoes were buffed to a perfect glossy shine. Every single element of his appearance projected an air of influence and success that made the other patrons look his way with a mixture of interest and deference. "Emma." He stepped forward to pull my chair out, his hand resting for a moment on my shoulder as I took my seat. That simple touch sent an unwelcome jolt through my body. It was a reflex from a past life when I had not just welcomed his touch, but treasured and yearned for it. You look beautiful. Thank you. I offered the words formally, my hands clasped together in my lap to keep him from seeing them shake. He poured a wine I had never seen before without even asking. It was a deep red and probably cost more than I cared to imagine. I cannot be out late. Mrs. Chen has to be home before 10. A faint smile touched his lips, one that told me he knew precisely how long Mrs. Chen was available, and it was much later than 10 o'clock. Of course. We should order right away. He caught the waiter's eye with a nearly invisible motion that commanded instant service. The sea bass is magnificent here, he said, and I think they have it prepared a special way tonight that you would probably love. The effortless manner in which he chose for both of us, guessing my tastes with an unnerving precision, was an uncomfortable echo of our past in New York. Back then, he always seemed to know what I desired before I did, whether it was a meal, a vintage of wine, or a new experience I never dreamed I could have. When I was 28, I thought his confidence was alluring and worldly. Now, at 32, it felt like a form of control. "How did you actually locate us?" I asked after the waiter had gone, my voice quiet enough that it would not travel to the other tables. I want the real story this time. Ethan gave his wine a thoughtful swirl, observing the liquid as if it held the answers to life's great mysteries. Vincent Caruso's associates were closer than I let on before. They followed your trail to Portland and then began methodically searching the nearby towns. It was truly just a matter of time until they showed up on your doorstep. A cold dread washed over me as he confirmed that my deepest fears had been real. "So how much time do we have until they make another attempt?" "They will not," he stated with complete and total conviction. Vincent and I came to an agreement last week. It concerned territorial claims and protocols for protecting family. He has consented to focus his efforts elsewhere. The sanitized corporate language did little to hide the raw truth of his message. Vincent Caruso had been dealt with, either through a negotiation supported by severe threats or by a more final solution. Regardless of the method, the menace he posed had vanished, erased by the man sitting across from me as easily as he had ordered our food. "What about the next one?" I pushed him. "Because there will always be more, correct?" Ethan gave a slow nod, his face becoming grave. "There always are, Emma. That is the reality of the enterprise I took over from my father, the legacy I have expanded. But these dangers can be contained, neutralized, and diverted. What is important is possessing the wealth and the network to remain one step ahead of them." Our first course was served, a pair of delicate plates that were more like works of art than something to be eaten. I pushed the perfectly cooked scallops around with my fork, my hunger stolen by the heavy turn of our discussion and the meaning behind his words. "What is it that you are actually suggesting?" I finally asked. I placed my fork down and looked him straight in the eye. "Because I will not let Ella and Eli be near any kind of violence, regardless of the security you say you can provide." "I am suggesting a partnership," he replied, leaning a little closer. "A very carefully planned arrangement that accepts the truth of our circumstances while safeguarding the people who mean the most to us both." He reached inside his suit coat, pulled out a manila folder, and set it on the table between us. It was handled with the same meticulous attention he applied to everything else. "Today, I purchased a home right here in town. It is large enough for all of us, has enough security to keep us safe, and is comfortable enough to give our children the life they should have." I looked at the folder but did not reach for it. I knew that the papers inside it would signal the end of the self-sufficient life I had worked so hard to create. "You expect us to move in with you?" "I want our children to have a stable home, true security, and chances that go far beyond what this little town can offer." His voice was steady and logical, but I could feel the unbending will just beneath the surface. "They will have access to superior schools, enriching cultural events, travel, and the kinds of connections that will help them no matter what careers they eventually decide to pursue. And what will my role be in this life you have planned? The question was sharper and more bitter than I wanted it to be. Will I be your mistress, the mother of your heirs who is supposed to be thankful for any small bit of attention you decide to give? For a moment, something changed in his expression. It might have been pain, or perhaps it was real shock at how I saw his offer. You would be my partner, Emma, in every single way that truly counts. You are the woman I should have asked to marry me 4 years ago, if things had been different. His words felt like a bridge stretching between us, but I was not certain I had the courage to walk across it. A part of me longed to trust him. It wanted to believe that the connection we once had in New York could be real again. But there was another voice inside me, the one that had protected us for 4 long years. It whispered warnings not to trust a man whose entire world was built on his mastery of deception. I am going to need guarantees, I told him at last. I want legally binding agreements that cover the children's safety, their schooling, and how much they are exposed to your business dealings. Ethan's smile was one of approval, as though I had just passed an important examination. I have already prepared them. He opened the folder to show me a stack of documents that were obviously prepared by very expensive lawyers. There were full custody agreements designed to protect their best interests, trust funds to cover their education and future, and specific clauses that shielded them from any involvement in family matters until they were adults. I quickly read through the documents, my sense of astonishment growing with every page. He had foreseen every possible objection I could have raised, and every protection I would have asked for was already there in writing. The trust funds by themselves contained more wealth than I could possibly earn in 10 lifetimes, and the custody papers granted me substantial power over the day-to-day decisions that would shape the children's lives. This is incredibly generous, I had to say, although my mind was still full of doubt. But what do you get from this deal? My family, he answered with disarming simplicity. I get the opportunity to get to know my own children, to be a real part of their lives, and to make certain they receive every possible advantage I can give them. He stopped for a moment, and his gaze became more serious. And maybe, with time, I might get a second chance to earn back your trust. He called it a chance to reclaim the life we had lost 4 years ago. A sudden fragility in his tone surprised me, pulling me back to moments in New York. Back then, his iron control would sometimes crack, revealing the real person behind the powerful exterior. Those brief flashes were what made me fall for him in the first place. They suggested that behind the authority and elegance was a man who needed someone, a man who sought connection as fiercely as he commanded the world around him. The house is prepared for you to move in immediately, he went on, his voice becoming all business again. Mrs. Patterson praised the neighborhood and the local schools. I am confident Ella and Eli will adjust to the change quite easily. It was no surprise he had already consulted with Mrs. Patterson. He had likely learned every single detail she knew about our life, our schedules, our friendships, our patterns. That realization should have made me furious. Instead, a part of me reluctantly admired how meticulous he was. Ethan Blackwood was many things, but above all, he was a man who made detailed plans and carried them out flawlessly. Just then, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Mrs. Chen. The children are sleeping. Everything is fine. Do not rush. My own babysitter was playing a role in his grand design. Her text arrived at the perfect moment, a clear reminder that he had considered every detail. He had foreseen every worry and cleared every single roadblock to his offer. I need some time to process this, I managed to say, even as we both understood I had very few choices left. He had already explained that staying where we were was dangerous. He made it plain that trying to run again would only put off what was coming. It would also put my children in even more danger. Of course, Ethan said, raising a hand for the bill. Every motion was as deliberate and refined as the man himself. But do not take too much time, Emma. There are others who will not be patient while I ensure my family is safe. He delivered the veiled warning with the same soft voice he had used to praise how I looked. That contrast made the threat land with even greater force. He guided me to my car, his hand resting on the small of my back. The touch felt like both protection and ownership. In that moment, I knew the discussion had ended. The only thing left was for me to officially give in. The moving truck pulled up at 7 o'clock in the morning. It was precisely 3 days after I had dinner with Ethan. I never officially accepted his offer. I had not signed a single paper. I did not even say the word yes out loud. Yet here they were. Professional movers were meticulously packing up our simple possessions. Ella and Eli sat on the porch swing watching it all. Their eyes were huge with excitement for the big adventure I promised them. The new house has a real library, I had explained, which was accurate based on the blueprints Ethan sent. And there is a huge backyard for Eli to work on his magic. That part was also true. I just conveniently left out the part about the advanced security systems that encircled the entire property like a hidden wall. Mrs. Chen was beside me at the door. Her worn hands were folded as she observed the methodical takedown of the life we had built. "Mr. Blackwood comes across as a very considerate person," she commented with deliberate care. "This will give the children chances they would never have had otherwise." I could only guess what Ethan's version of the story was. How did he justify his abrupt entry into our world? How did he frame his immediate insertion into our family? Mrs. Chen had the age and the wisdom to know she was only getting a fraction of the real story. But her kindness kept her from asking the hard questions. She knew they would make things awkward and uncomfortable for me. Yes, I found myself agreeing. Because what other answer could there possibly be? I could not tell her that I was surrendering our hard-earned freedom for safety, from threats I did not even begin to comprehend. I could not admit that I was letting my own children be pulled into a dangerous world where their father's colleagues resolved their conflicts with violence instead of courtrooms. The home Ethan had bought was on a 5-acre lot. It was at the very end of the most prestigious street in Willowbrook. The massive modern building was somehow both intimidating and inviting at the same time. Windows stretched from the floor to the ceiling, looking out onto perfectly manicured gardens. Inside, the rooms were open and flowed into each other without any barriers. The kitchen itself was bigger than our whole last living room. It was filled with machines that likely cost more than I made in a year. "Mama, come see!" Eli's voice bounced off the towering ceilings. He had found the media room, which had a giant screen and seats like a real theater. "We have our very own movie theater." Ella, on the other hand, was captivated by the library. She traced her little fingers over the spines of books on the shelves. There were timeless classics and modern novels. Many were rare first editions that looked like they should be behind glass in a museum. "Am I allowed to read any of them?" she whispered, her voice full of awe. "Of course," Ethan answered. He materialized in the doorway with that quiet elegance that was so typical of him. He was dressed down today in khakis and a sweater. It was just a navy sweater, but it probably cost more than my food budget for a month. Yet even in casual clothes, he radiated an air of total authority. "Some of these might be a little difficult for now," he told Ella gently, "but we can work our way up to them together." The easy way he included himself in her education, the assumption that he and I would guide their growth together, should have bothered me. But it did not. Instead, I saw how easily he connected with them. I watched Eli move toward him with that blind faith that kids only give to grown-ups they know truly care. Mrs. Collins, from the moving company, walked over holding a clipboard. "Where should we put the boxes from the main bedroom?" she asked. I paused, the question hitting me with sudden force. I realized I did not know where I was meant to sleep in this new life. Ethan had given me a tour the day before. He had shown me the kids' rooms, complete with their own desks and cozy reading corners. But he had avoided the subject of where the adults would sleep. "The main bedroom suite is down at the end of the hallway," Ethan said without missing a beat, materializing right beside me. "Emma, maybe you can direct them where things should go." The primary suite was breathtaking. A massive king-sized bed was the center of the room. and glass doors opened onto a personal balcony with a view of the gardens. Inside the huge walk-in closet, his things were already in place. Expensive suits and clothes were organized with sharp precision. A little area on one side had been left empty for me. The way the space was divided sent a clear message. This was his territory, and I was just a guest being granted shelter. "We have to talk about some rules," I said, waiting until the movers had dropped my bags and left the room. "We need to manage what the children expect from us." Ethan's smile was calm and almost condescending. "What kind of rules are you thinking about?" he asked. "For a start, we should have our own bedrooms," I said. "At least for now, until we know how this is all going to play out." He walked over to the window. He gazed down at the gardens where Ella and Eli were playing on a huge new playground, one that definitely was not there yesterday. "The guest bedroom is available, of course, if that is what you truly want," he said. "However, I should mention that I have a number of business partners visiting in the coming weeks," he added. "It could create some complications if we are clearly living in separate parts of the house." Of course he had business partners. Of course, our private life had to conform to his public image. It was becoming painfully clear that every single part of this life was being managed for his benefit. My own feelings and choices were, at best, a minor detail in his grand plan. My phone began to ring, cutting through my rising anger. I did not recognize the number on the screen, but the timing felt significant, so I answered it. I ignored my normal rule of never picking up for unknown numbers. "Am I speaking with Emma Collins?" The voice was new to me. It sounded businesslike, but there was a sharp undertone that sent a chill down my spine. "Who is calling?" I asked. I stepped back from the window, a gut instinct to find a private space for a call that already felt dangerous. "I am someone who knew you back in New York," the voice said, "and I am extremely curious about your new arrangements." A heavy, threatening silence followed. "Especially your reunion with Ethan Blackwood." Fear shot through me, cold and sharp. I looked out the window and saw Ella and Eli on the swings. I could hear their happy laughter drifting in the air. They were so pure, so completely oblivious. They had no idea that their safe new world had likely drawn the very same danger. The kind of notice I had spent 4 long years desperately trying to avoid. "I have no idea what you mean," I lied, though the denial felt weak and useless. We both knew it was a lie. "Oh, I think you do," the voice replied. "The real question is, do you have any clue what you have stumbled into?" The tone shifted, becoming casual and friendly, which was even more terrifying. "The women in Ethan Blackwood's life do not tend to last very long, Emma. This is especially true for the ones who learn too much about his professional dealings." I opened my mouth to say something, but the phone was suddenly snatched from my fingers. Ethan had crossed the room without making a single sound. His entire face had changed, becoming a mask of cold fury as he lifted the phone to his own ear. "This is Blackwood," he stated. His voice was low, but it held a type of absolute power that could intimidate armies. He went silent, listening to the person on the other end. "Mr. Torino, I did not expect to hear from you. I assume you are calling to congratulate me on bringing my family back together." He paused again, this time for much longer. I studied Ethan's expression, seeing the muscles around his eyes twitch. I saw his body shift slightly, the small adjustment of a predator getting ready to attack. "I understand," he finally said. "Allow me to make one thing perfectly clear for you, Anthony. Emma and our children are now under my personal protection. If you or anyone else tries to reach them again, I will treat it as a direct attack on my family." His voice became a low, dangerous whisper. He whispered, "And you already know my response when my family is threatened." He finished the conversation and returned the phone to me. His face had already settled back into its usual disciplined composure, but I had caught a glimpse of the man behind the sophisticated mask. The man who had constructed an empire using strategic violence and complete ruthlessness. "Who was that?" I asked, even though a part of me was sure I did not want the answer. "Anthony Torino." He serves interests that would much rather see me preoccupied by personal issues than concentrating on business growth. Ethan walked toward the French doors, his eyes finding the children playing in the garden below. He will not be making another call. The certainty in his tone implied that Anthony Torino's capacity for making phone calls would likely be permanently removed in the very near future. A piece of me felt horrified by what that meant, but another piece felt a powerful satisfaction. The person who threatened my children would suffer the consequences for his error. So this is what our life is going to be, isn't it? I said it more like a statement than a question. Never-ending threats, constant awareness, and perpetual reminders that we now exist inside your world. Ethan turned away from the glass, his gray eyes locking with mine with a shocking intensity. This is how your life has always been, Emma. You were simply unaware of it until now. The only change is that you now have defense, assets, and the safety that comes from being a member of my family. His family. I was not just under his wing, not merely a recipient of his wealth, but an actual part of his family with all the rights and responsibilities that came with it. As I looked out at Ella and Eli playing in their new yard, encircled by security they could not perceive and shielded by a power they could not imagine, I understood Ethan was correct. We were his now, totally and forever. And for all the logical protests I could make, for all the worries about what belonging to him might cost, I was starting to see that it could be the single thing that stood between my children and dangers I was only now starting to grasp. After 3 weeks in our new existence, I had almost started to think that Ethan might have been right about the protection he gave us. The children had adjusted to their new schedules with a strength that made me feel both proud and sad. I was proud of their adaptability, but heartbroken they had to learn it so early. Ella dove into the huge library with the excitement of a historian finding forgotten texts. Meanwhile, Eli would spend hours in the wide backyard perfecting more and more complex magic tricks, watched by the amused eyes of Ethan's security detail. The men who guarded us had transformed into familiar figures instead of menacing strangers. Marcus, the leader of the security team, even cracked a smile when Eli made a coin vanish for the 5th time that afternoon. David, the man who watched the property line, had assisted Ella in saving a hurt bird and even constructed a small shelter for it in the garden. They were professional, quiet, and surprisingly kind to the children, who simply saw them as friendly grown-ups and not as armed protectors. Ethan himself turned out to be a dedicated father in a way that both amazed and disturbed me. He never missed their bedtime stories, helped with schoolwork with endless patience, and took real pleasure in their small victories. When Ella completed her first chapter book from start to finish, he marked the occasion by taking our whole family to dinner at the best family-style restaurant in the next town over. After Eli finally learned the card trick he was having trouble with, Ethan hired a professional magician to come give him one-on-one lessons. Everything fell apart on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the home office Ethan had created for me, handling correspondence for his legal business ventures, while the children were playing in the garden under Marcus's supervision. The job was captivating, and it challenged me in ways that made me remember why I once enjoyed accounting before terror forced me into hiding. Numbers told the truth. Patterns emerged with careful study. There was a deep satisfaction in organizing intricate financial records. My phone buzzed just as I put the final touches on a quarterly report. Ethan's name flashed on the screen, causing that familiar jolt of awareness that always surprised me. 3 weeks of living so close to him had not lessened the intense physical pull that first brought us together. In fact, watching him interact with Ella and Eli had only deepened the emotions I was still attempting to understand. Emma. His voice had a sense of urgency that I had never heard from him. It was controlled, yet the tension was undeniable. Where are the children? I instinctively looked out the window, fully expecting to see them on the swing set. But instead, I saw Marcus pacing by the garden shed, his phone glued to his ear, his face a mask of serious concern. David was gone, and the backyard that was normally filled with the sounds of children's laughter was frighteningly still. "They are supposed to be outside," I said, my feet already carrying me toward the French doors to the patio. "Marcus is out there, but I can't see them." "Go back inside the house now," Ethan commanded, his voice slicing through my growing terror like a knife. "Lock every door, and do not move until I call you back. Do not open the door for anyone else." The connection ended before I could voice any of the questions that were screaming in my mind. I bolted outside, shouting for Ella and Eli, as my heart pounded violently inside my chest. Marcus came around the corner of the shed, and his look confirmed my deepest fears before he even uttered a sound. "Mrs. Collins, we have to get you indoors right now," he stated, his hand already on my arm, steering me toward the house with a firm but gentle force. "Mr. Blackwood is taking care of the situation." "What situation?" My voice was higher than I wanted, thin with the hysteria I was desperately trying to suppress. "Where are my children?" Marcus's jaw clenched almost too subtly to notice. "Eli was abducted from the rear garden roughly 15 minutes ago. Ella is unharmed. She was inside the house using the restroom at the time. We have teams searching the property borders, and Mr. Blackwood has mobilized every resource at his disposal." My entire world spun, the edges of my sight turning dark as the reality of his words crashed down on me. Someone had abducted my son. My wonderful, trusting little boy who would perform magic for any person who would stop to watch, who still saw the world as a place that was mostly good and safe. The child whose gray eyes contained all of Ethan's sharp intellect, mixed with an innocence that could break my heart with just one smile. Who? The word was barely a whisper. Who would take him? "We are currently working to identify them," Marcus answered, his professional composure offering no relief from the terror clawing its way up my throat. "Mr. Blackwood will have information for us shortly. I discovered Ella in the library. She was curled up in the big reading chair she had made her own, her little frame shaking with sobs that felt like physical blows to my own body. The second she saw me, she flew into my arms. Her words spilled out in a rush between ragged breaths. I went to the bathroom, and when I got back, Eli was just gone." There was a strange man talking to Marcus. "Everyone was running all over the place, and nobody will tell me where Eli went. And I'm so scared, Mommy. I'm just so scared." I clutched her tightly to my chest, stroking her dark hair as my own tears began to fall without a sound. All the safety Ethan had guaranteed, all the security systems and skilled bodyguards. And yet, someone had still found a way to steal my child. The safe world I was slowly starting to believe in had just shown itself to be as breakable as every other fantasy of safety I had ever created for myself. My phone vibrated again. It was Ethan's name on the display, but the voice that answered was not his. "Mrs. Collins, my name is Anthony Torino. I believe you and I spoke very briefly a few weeks back." His voice was silky and conversational, like he was calling about dinner reservations instead of holding my son captive. "I have something that is yours." "Where is he?" My voice was a low growl. Every trace of politeness had been burned away by a mother's rage that was far hotter than any fear. "If you have harmed him—" "He is perfectly fine for the moment," Torino cut in. "He is a delightful boy, very well-mannered, very trusting. He has been demonstrating his magic tricks for me, as we wait for his father to show up." Father. Not his stepfather, not his mother's new partner, but his father. Even the man who kidnapped Eli understood a truth I had been trying so hard to push away. "What is it that you want?" I demanded, even though I knew the price would be something I could never pay. "I want Ethan Blackwood to withdraw from certain business ventures that are in conflict with my own. It is not very complicated. I just need a signed contract that transfers his territorial rights and a guarantee to change the direction of his expansion plans." Torino went quiet for a moment, and I could hear what sounded like traffic in the distance. "He has 2 hours to think about my offer. After that time, I am afraid young Eli might just vanish for good, just like his father's other problems have." The call disconnected, leaving me frozen, staring at the phone as Ella held on to me with all of her small might. 2 hours. Someone was giving Ethan Blackwood 2 hours to pick between his corporate empire and the life of his son, as if there was ever any doubt about which one was more important. Marcus appeared at the door, his face serious but resolute. "Mrs. Collins, Mr. Blackwood is going to be here in 20 minutes. He asked me to tell you that every possible thing is being done to bring Eli home to you safely." "And what if it is not enough?" I asked, giving a voice to the terrible fear that was consuming me from the inside out. "What happens if this a time he cannot mend this?" The smile on Marcus's face was sharp as a blade, projecting total faith in his boss's power. "Ma'am, you have never witnessed the true extent of Mr. Blackwood's abilities when someone threatens his own. Anthony Torino has just made the very last error of his professional life." When Ethan finally showed up, he brought a small army with him. While not literal soldiers, they were frighteningly close. A fleet of black sport utility vehicles arrived, filled with men whose precise movements screamed military discipline and whose gazes held the detached coolness of seasoned professionals. Ethan stormed into the home like a hurricane, pulling Ella and me into an embrace that felt as secure as a steel vault. "He is going to be perfectly fine," he whispered into my hair, his tone radiating absolute conviction. "I give you my word, Emma. I am bringing our son back home." Did he just say our son? He did not say your son, or the child, but our son. That simple, possessive word became a shield around my heart, giving me the first real sense of peace I had known since I learned Eli was gone. 90 minutes passed, and then it was all finished. Ethan came back carrying Eli, who was sound asleep in his arms, worn out from his ordeal, but entirely safe. The people who had taken him were handled permanently. I could see it in the chilling darkness of Ethan's eyes when I brought up the subject of what would happen to them. Anthony Torino would never endanger another soul again. Later that night, as we all sat on the master bed, with both our children sleeping between us despite having their own beautiful rooms, I at last grasped the truth Ethan had been trying to show me this whole time. His actions were never about dominance or ownership, and they were not even about a father's legal rights. This was about family in its most raw and basic form, the fierce instinct to eliminate any threat to the people you love more than life itself. "I am so sorry," I said softly into the dark. "I am sorry for resisting this, for attempting to shield them from you, and for thinking we could ever be truly safe on our own." His arm pulled me closer, and his lips brushed my temple in a silent gesture that felt more like a solemn vow. "You do not have a single thing to be sorry for. You were defending them with the only tools you had." His voice dropped lower, becoming more intense. "But from now on, you know there is a much better way. From now on, you know that when we are united, we are far more powerful than anyone who would dare to harm our family. Our family." Those words no longer sounded like a danger or a prison, but like arriving home after a terrifying and exhausting journey. As I slowly fell asleep, encircled by the three individuals who meant everything in the world to me, I understood that surrender is not always a defeat. Sometimes it is the simple wisdom of knowing you have discovered something truly worth holding on to. The next day would surely present new obstacles, new dangers, and fresh reminders of the perilous new world we lived in. But in this moment, we were whole. In this moment, we were secure. And for the first time in 4 long years, I did not feel a single trace of fear about what the sunrise might bring. Because no matter what came with it, we would stand together and face it. If this story held you until the very last word, leave a like, drop a comment, and tell me. If you discovered the father of your children was a mob boss, would you run or would you stay? Share this with someone who understands that love and fear can live in the same heart. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories and valuable life lessons to our audience.